Can a single book literally topple a 250-year-old military dictatorship? Well, believe it or not, that's exactly what happened. Today, we're digging into the wild story of a philosophical book written almost 2 centuries ago in Japan that did just that. It's an amazing look at how one dangerous idea can and did change the world. So it all kicks off with these words, written way back in 1825. I mean, they sound pretty grand, right? Almost like something out of a myth or even a prayer. They're from a book called Shinron, which translates to New Theses. But that's the real mystery here, isn't it? How on earth did a passage like that become the ideological gasoline for a violent revolution? How did a few sentences become a weapon powerful enough to literally build a new nation from the ground up? All right, so let's get into it. To really understand why this book was so explosive, you've got to understand the world it came from. We're talking about 19th century Japan, a country that was basically living in a bubble. And when you compare Japan to the West back then, wow, it was like night and day. For 250 years, Japan had been totally peaceful, sealed off from the world under this locked country policy. You know, the legendary samurai, they'd basically become accountants, swapping their swords for ink brushes. But at the same time, the Western empires were just taking over the world. They had the industry, the tech, the massive militaries. And there's Japan, this quiet island with absolutely no idea that a hurricane was about to hit. And the leaders, they were in some serious denial. I mean, you have these huge British and Russian warships showing up off the coast, just bristling with cannons. And the official government line was, they're probably just lost merchant ships. Seriously, that level of it's fine was, well, it was a massive mistake. But there was one guy who wasn't buying it. His name was Aizawa Sashisai. Now, he wasn't a general or anything. He was a scholar. You can basically think of him as the top national security analyst of his time. He was reading everything he could get his hands on about the West, and he saw the huge, existential danger that his country was sleeping-walking into. So completely filled with this sense of crisis, he sits down and writes his desperate warning, which becomes the book Shinron. So let's unpack this. What exactly made his ideas so dangerous? Okay, his big idea, the core of the whole thing, was a concept he called kokutai. And you have to understand, this was seriously radical. See, back then, people in Japan didn't really think of themselves as Japanese. Their loyalty was to their local lord, their hometown. Aizawa knew that you can't fight a global superpower as a bunch of disconnected little groups. You need a single, unified national identity. And kokutai was his solution, this idea of a shared, sacred national essence that would tie everyone together under one powerful, divine symbol. And that symbol? The emperor. Now, to get this, you have to understand Japan's really unique dual power system. On one hand, you had the shogun. He was the military dictator, the guy with all the actual power, the army, the government, the whole shebang. He was the de facto king. But then you also had the emperor, who was seen as this divine, godlike figure. He had tons of spiritual authority, but zero real-world power. And for hundreds of years, this strange setup just worked. Nobody questioned it. And then Aizawa comes along and just blows the whole thing up. He argues, and this was a bombshell, that the shogun wasn't the real ruler. No, he was just a temporary manager whose power was only loaned to him by the true eternal ruler, the emperor. I mean, this was political dynamite. He was basically pulling the ideological rug right out from under the entire military government. But Aizawa wasn't just being political. He was being incredibly strategic. He realized the West's most powerful weapon wasn't their ships or their cannons. It was their ideas. He laid out this whole strategy he called the invisible invasion. He saw how they used Christian missionaries to get a foothold, winning over the people first. It was like they were installing new ideological software to overwrite the country's native operating system, weakening it from the inside before the military even had to show up. It was genius. And he argued the only way to fight back was with a spiritual defense that was just as strong. Okay, but here's the biggest twist in the whole story, the ultimate irony. Aizawa wrote this whole book to save the shogun's government, right? To wake it up and make it stronger. But what actually happened was, well, the complete opposite. So think about it. He wrote this thing as advice for the shogun. But his ideas were so radical, so threatening to the people in charge, that the government immediately banned the book. And you know what happens when you ban something, right? It just makes people want it more. Young, fiery samurai started secretly copying the whole thing by hand. It became this underground bestseller, spreading like a virus. And then, A few decades later, the kids who grew up secretly reading this forbidden book, they took its ideas as gospel, picked up their swords, and completely destroyed the very government Aizawa was trying to save. And the result of all this? A massive event called the Meiji Restoration. It was a brutal civil war that ended the shogunate for good, put the emperor back in charge, and kicked off this insane rush to modernize the entire country. One book lit the fuse that blew up the old Japan and created the new one, setting it on the path to become a world power and, planting the seeds for the hyper-nationalism that would shape its future. So why does a 200-year-old story about a banned book in Japan matter today? Well, turns out it matters a lot. Aizawa's whole crisis was about what happens to your identity when it's under attack from the outside. And if you think about it, that feels incredibly relevant right now. Yeah, the threats just wear a different uniform these days. Instead of warships with cannons, we have the intense pressure of a global economy. Instead of missionaries bringing foreign religions, we have a 24/7 fire hose of global social media and pop culture. That old threat of physical colonization, well, now it's more like an invisible invasion of information, constantly nudging our beliefs and how we see ourselves. Ultimately, Shinron is this amazing case study of what happens when a culture feels like its very soul is under attack. It really makes you think. It forces us all to ask some hard questions about what it means to be us in a world where everything, cultures, ideas, information, is constantly mashing together at the speed of light. And that really brings it all home to a final question for you. Aizawa's answer for Japan was kokutai. But for us, today, living in this age of information overload where culture feels so global and blended, we all kind of have to ask ourselves the same thing on a personal level. When you strip everything else away, what's your non-negotiable core? What's the bedrock of your identity?